now, without further delay, let's begin today's event. Once again, new data distribution platforms on the cloud. It's my pleasure to introduce your first speaker today, and that is Pinaki Dham, Head of Product Innovation for ICE Data Services. Pinaki, you have the floor.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining this panel discussion. This is part of an ongoing series to look at trends in in financial data and new access technologies. Today, we're going to focus on new distribution platforms in the cloud. Now, cloud migration in capital markets is definitely not new. But what we're going to explore today is how firms are leveraging these new platforms to integrate data faster, to go faster from data sourcing to analysis. What are the use cases that are benefiting from these new trends and how? But before we go into that, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. Anya, if I can talk with you.
Yes, Pinaki, thank you for having me. I'm Anya Butov. I'm Chief Revenue Officer of Beacon Platform. And Beacon is a proud cloud-native company whose mission is to build the future of the financial markets on the cloud. And I'm particularly excited to join this panel because our core business at Beacon is to empower developers and business users with precisely what we're talking about today, leveraging these new data distribution models, building apps, and deploying them to business users quickly. So this is right up our alley, and I appreciate you having me.
Matt?
Thank you, Pinaki. Really excited to be here. Hi, I'm Matt Glickman. I lead financial services here at Snowflake. I've been here since GA in 2015. Snowflake, our mission is to mobilize the world's data. We were built for the cloud. We were, everything about what Snowflake is and what our customers are using us for is about performing analytics and distribution of data on the cloud. So this is very, very relevant, very exciting timing, and very excited to be here.
Paul?
Hi, Pinaki. Thanks very much for having us. Paul Watmo, founder and CEO of Iowa Rocks. We're a cloud-based marketplace for data, built on top of MDX technology for collection, storage, and distribution of data, with a particular focus on real-time data. We're at the sharp end of that collect, store, typically in the cloud, and distribute down to data consumers.
Christian? Christian, are you on mute?
Sorry about that. Yes. Hi, I'm Christian Schneider. I'm a global account manager and team lead at Amazon Web Services. I joined Amazon back in 2013 when very few financial institutions were really embracing the cloud, and switched over to the capital market space about 4 years ago. So I've been working quite some time, and it's been a very exciting journey watching the capital markets industry really embrace the cloud. And I'm fortunate enough to have so many great customers on the panel with me today.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I would like to start with a question on use cases. Traditionally, in an on-prem setting, clients ingest files or a data feed into dedicated distribution. They do their ETL and expensive transformations before an application can use the data. So it's quite a big transition from that to a marketplace or some concept of a shared hosted model where in the cloud where a client can access application-ready data. So what use cases are really making that transition, and what are some of the success criteria? Anya, if I could start with you on that note.
Sure, absolutely. So as one of our founders and CEO likes to say, data without behavior is just noise. And I think we really take that to heart. I think what we're seeing with our clients is that the key to this new distribution model and the new workflow is to make that data commercially valuable as quickly as possible. And a lot of that pipeline chain that you've talked about, Pinaki, can be automated, but the most important step is being able to deploy those insights to business users. So some of the use cases that we're saying, Beacon works a lot with clients who are active in derivatives. There's often a lot of complex modeling involved, so you need a good data model that is already there in the framework to make those applications commercially valuable. We see a lot of new product development quant research platforms, new ways of generating trade signals and managing risk, just to name a few. And really what our clients are looking for is that in the new cloud native world, when data is easily accessible through a marketplace, or applications are easily accessible through a marketplace, that it isn't just a toy or a sandbox. It has to be a tool that works for the business.
Mm-hmm. And Matt, you're also providing a technology solution in the cloud. Which type of user base would you say is driving adoption? Does the demographic overlap with what Anya was talking about, or is it a different user base?
There's definitely an overlap, and I think that, and that's why we're partnering with Beacon as well. So Snowflake at its heart is a data platform that runs in the cloud, but it connects all of our customers together in effectively one big global system, running on cloud providers like AWS. And the ability to take all this legacy data pipelines, you mentioned, Pinaki, of ETL and all these other painful processes that all companies across the industry have to just do as just a course of doing business. We're now on the verge of that being able to go away, right? Data should no longer have to move. When ICE has data that ICE is going to distribute, it should not be a process where a customer of ICE has to now take that data and reconstruct it. It should stay in ICE's control, and ICE gives access to their customers, and their customers can now join that data live because we're now all operating in the cloud. Secondly, the ability to take new alternative data sets and bring them on in a more timely fashion, which is particularly always in demand with the data science and quant community. Like, this has become really top of mind, particularly as this crisis now, as opposed to the last crisis, has unfolded. Because now there's a new desire for new data sets that are giving people an idea of how this economic recovery is going to happen. And the idea of being able to shrink down the amount of time that you can actually get access to data and not have to involve a new IT process and just have it align with your data that's already in your analytic system is real. And this is something in my previous life, when I was running analytics platforms at Goldman Sachs, seeing how many of these pipelines had to be maintained and how long it took to get new data pipelines into a place like Goldman was heartbreaking. And the good news is that we're now on the verge of and it's happening now, where this breakthrough of data can now be distributed freely, and people can access the data they need, but in a secure and managed way.
Okay. Paul, I know you host a marketplace at Iowa Rocks, but you also mentioned that you have this focus around real-time streaming data, which is a bit of a different animal in the cloud context, if you think about it. What are you seeing in terms of patterns around use cases around this streaming data in the cloud?
Yeah, we've been in the real-time data space for many more years, I care to remember. Over the last 20 years, we've been handling real-time data in different high demanding environments, like a trading environment, a broking environment, etc. And as we've evolved our technology, and in parallel with the evolution of the public internet, cloud and cloud providers, all these things have converged exceptionally well. And I think, we're all benefiting during this time of crisis from, kind of video conferencing facilities like we're on at the moment, in terms of allowing continuity and work. Well, the same has gone on in that handling of real-time data. And we're a marketplace that is available and open and ready now. And as you know, Pinaki, we're carrying ICE data services, consolidated feeds over our marketplace. We do that consumption. So we collect data, and then we store data, and we distribute data. And those disciplines, are the same as they were 20 years ago when we were doing that within an environment within a bank or a local or wider area network. It's the same disciplines that we need to be aware of, performance, latency, security, etc. Now we've moved into a cloud-hosted environment and all the benefits that brings. So we're seeing use cases across the industry, whether that's a global tier 1 investment bank looking to drive cost savings from the legacy infrastructure that it has, the feeds that it's been consuming or the way it's been consuming, Now they're looking to challenge that, and they're looking to challenge that with cloud-based marketplaces like ours, where we can rapidly onboard data sets because we have a heritage and expertise in market data API integration, particularly real-time streaming, as you touch on. So that, that's servicing a global tier one investment bank through they say the interdealer brokers, which are mature, sophisticated data sales operations who now want to directly distribute their data to their clients, and they're leveraging cloud marketplaces like us to do that. Through to small investment managers that, as it was one of the other panelists saying, they want to rapidly onboard data. Driving of alpha is absolutely critical for these guys. Access to new data sets, whether it's clinical data that is obviously critical at the moment, or whether it's other type of alternative data. Our marketplace is set to distribute that. And it's that rapidity of onboarding the data, making it available, and then being able to access that data, frankly, in any format. A bit like the analogy is when we now, we look at the way Netflix has transformed that world. Now I can watch a film on demand wherever I want to watch it on any device, probably in multiple places and so forth. So we're seeing the trends coming through from that retail sector, consumer sector, into the consumption models of people looking to consume market data, real-time data, and other data sets as well. And I think that's going to continue because, the people that are moving into those seats of decision-making seats are used to being able to consume things on demand on any device, wherever they are. So I think we're going to see that pushing through into decision-making, and we're certainly seeing it. And it's a fascinating time.
So clearly that same theme of surfacing the data to the end user faster, whether it's streaming or batch or historical data, that seems to be seen across the board. Christian, from the AWS perspective, you clearly have a bird's eye view to all these use cases. I mean, they're all eventually using cloud infrastructure. Anything you want to add from your perspective?
Sure. It's interesting. From a demand perspective, the cloud has given a lot of companies incredible agility to fail fast and fail often. As you see, with companies like Fidelity, for example, the Fidelity Center for Advanced Technology has been experimenting and launching applications for the retail side in mobile trading, iPhone applications, Apple Watch applications, and now they're even going so far as to begin to test out virtual reality. So, as we think about data sets coming in for even the retail side, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for creativity there. The fintech industry continues to evolve in that space. That is almost 100% on the cloud also. So they're bringing creative views. But probably the area that for me personally is the most exciting is to see what some of the hedge funds are doing. Hedge funds used to be restricted by their own HPC clusters, right? So they would be sort of locked into how many cores they had, how many data scientists were asking for time. They would be scheduling workloads in the evenings or on the weekends and trying to fit in their work. And what we're seeing now with some companies like AQR and Citadel and some of these others is they're able to offer to their data scientists, seemingly limitless access to compute and access to things like FSx for Lustre, which is our high-speed file system, and Batch, which is our ability to a scheduler. They're able to very quickly and very easily stand up very, very large workloads. Those, of course, need to be fed by data. They need to be fed by traditional data sources and also alternative data as the creativity of these data scientists sort of push the limits with what's out there and what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Right. So clearly one benefit is leveraging elastic cloud compute and reducing the friction to data access. With my next question, I want to go into that solution space a little bit, right? So
sure.
When we talk about hosted data, people often talk about, I don't want to copy the same data multiple times, but based on the conversation we've been having, I think the value is much more, and it's in the network effect. I think, Matt, you were alluding to this concept of a data network, if you will, that people can tap into. which is much more than saving infrastructure or storage costs. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what is the value proposition around that from your perspective.
Yeah, no, I really think this is the exciting moment that we're in, where now there's not only data sets, but there's a network of data sets that everyone can connect to, right? Both individual companies, and Christian mentioned about like hedge funds who now can tap into this network, but also application companies, like Beacon, can actually sit on top of this data network and build this next generation of applications and platforms that expose this network, right? Because at the end of the day, Pinaki, like you said, it's not about these individual data sets. It's the ability to bring it together and to effectively connect these data sets wherever they are around the world. Because the cloud is connecting us all, you can now tap into this network, so that if I have a data set that I want to provide into this network, I just tap in, and now this entire network of all of these companies, all these applications can tap into that, as all the friction goes away, right? Any of the non-differentiating capability that people had invested in previously and having to pull data in, they can now let that go, so that if I'm actually starting a hedge fund today, in some ways, I can now not only catch up, but leapfrog the competitors from an infrastructure perspective, because of the fact of what the cloud and the data cloud and this whole connected network let me do. And then this next class of applications that, again, are starting from this data cloud and building up is, I think it's going to be the next huge industry of applications and companies that build upon this interconnected network. Because if anything, you're going to have more and more of these models. They're going to have more and more demand for data. And if I can connect to this data, see what other data sets relate to it, and be able to explore and connect and blend, and if it's live in the same systems that I'm running in, the opportunities are endless.
Mm-hmm. And Anya, so Beacon is clearly one of the platforms that taps into this network and surfaces the data to end users. But Matt touched upon, end users also have this need for customization. For example, if I'm hosting tick data, right, in the network, an end user might need to do their own custom bars from those ticks, or create their own risk calculations or what have you. How does a platform such as Beacon balance this need for customization with the ability to source application-ready data from this shared data network? Or is that a problem domain for you?
Thank you, Pinaki. That's a very good setup, which I appreciate. Just to piggyback off what Matt and others have said, we feel that these data networks and marketplaces and app marketplaces, they're necessary but not sufficient. And one of the reasons is what you just said, Pinaki. It's customization. So I think it was Paul who said, the Netflix example of being able to watch a movie on any device, anytime. The way that Beacon would extend that analogy is people want to create their own movie too, right? They want to edit the movie, they want to create the movie. And so that is how I think of Beacon fitting into the ecosystem. If you have a developer platform, then it opens up a lot of opportunities for creativity and for customization, not just kind of at an around the edges or API level. With Beacon, we actually give our source code to our clients. It's not open source, it's transparent source in the sense that it's read-only. But what it allows us to do, allows our clients to do, is they can take customization beyond just ETL. They can actually integrate their own proprietary analytics. They can create proprietary applications. And because we very much believe in the ecosystem and the network effects, they can also then monetize those things through an app store concept. So I think we're very much on board with this. And I think that it's not just about users kind of consuming all of this data. It's also empowering them to do things with it that are really truly innovative. And in order to do that, we believe they need a developer platform that can connect, querying to a data solution like Snowflake, that it can leverage the infrastructure of AWS. It can provide the security around all of those things. It can respect the entitlements of the data providers. And so Beacon's place in this ecosystem is to provide that developer platform that can connect all of these dots and empower our clients to really focus on their competitive edge and be creative and be innovative with their organizations.
And Christian, from the AWS side, you provide the infrastructure, but you also provide a lot of the tooling that clients can assemble and apply to the data to do customization and so forth. Anything you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it will be interesting to watch how much the customers continue to move into the data lake philosophy, where we talked a lot about where data is and where it's housed, and accessing historical data, accessing data that may be very proprietary to an organization. So the interesting mix of publicly available data sets, internal data, and then alternative data sets into the data lake concept is going to be something to watch going forward. We're seeing a lot of our customers begin to embrace that using a very simple, AWS S3 platform, which is our object store, and then using products like Glue, which is an ETL tool, to allow them to absorb that data and create a data lake rather than a data swamp, as the term is used oftentimes. But the analytical tools that both at AWS creates, as well as our partners on these calls create, to access that data lake and to begin to find creative findings is going to be the very exciting trend to watch going forward.
Great. I'm going to slightly pivot to the real-time data distribution topic for a bit. We have seen the requirement grow exponentially, and Paul, you touched upon a couple of use cases, but there still seems to be a lot of questions on latency, product maturity, scalability, and so forth when it comes to real-time data in the cloud. What would you say, Paul, are some of the drivers or decision criteria for clients that are making that switch to the cloud? Which attributes are weighing in more than others?
Those clients that are not at the ultra low latency or low latency end of the spectrum, the real-time streaming data that we handle credibly, capably, constantly. Again, I go back to the point about the emergence and the convergence of internet technology, cloud technology and availability, cost, etc. And we're seeing, people testing the kind of end-to-end latency of from the collection, store, and distribute disciplines, and being more than satisfied with that speed of delivery for application consumption, for end user market data, real-time market data display type consumption. So those aspects, coupled with the cost benefits from the infrastructure that we're all talking about, are really driving the kind of adoption and certainly the demand we're seeing and the use cases that we're servicing.
Mm-hmm. So clearly there's a spectrum of use cases that are not latency sensitive that benefit from the scalability and the elastic compute in the cloud and the internet, the web scale access. Christian, you're clearly getting a lot of customer questions around real-time data too. What's your observation on that?
Yeah, we still have that old speed of light problem with real-time data, but being able to use a backbone to distribute your data globally is something that's going to be very critical, especially companies like ICE, who are going to be looking at new markets around the world that may not have traditionally been accessing streaming data. Suddenly, as the network strengthens, as the ability for companies like yours to be able to distribute it on a backbone like AWS or any other cloud service provider. But what's interesting on the other side is, how are they consuming this data and how are they using it and being able to ingest streaming data? We've built a tool many years ago called Kinesis, which companies like Zillow use and Netflix use, and they're very good for helping you to collect, process, analyze data streams, video streams to that effect. But what we found in the financial services industry was that folks were really migrating towards Apache Kafka, which was an open source solution that was being built. And they were basically coming to us saying, we want to use Kafka to be able to absorb all this data and actually use it. So we actually pushed into building out a managed Kafka service that has been embraced very aggressively in the financial services industry. So I think it's important for the data providers to realize how their customers are using this. For example, there's a company called Nutmeg, which is Europe's largest digital wealth manager. And they're helping their consumers to grow their wealth and reach their financial goals by using Apache Kafka to underpin their journey towards an event-driven architecture. So that's just one example of new companies coming out, wanting streaming data to be coming into their environment. So I think it presents a very neat opportunity for the exchangers and other data service providers that are out there.
Just
so some of the tooling
add,
is there. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Tanya. No, but please go ahead.
Sorry, just wanted to add to that. I think there's within financial services, I think there's certainly use cases that require special hardware, right? When you're talking about the speed of light, low latency type of use cases. But the cloud is really great for lots of use cases because, it makes it easy to co-locate data from both the providers and the consumers on a really fast internal network. And then if you can vend that data out to apps that have, kind of eyeball latency, then that's very, very powerful. So I used to work at Goldman as well, actually, on a trading floor. And when I think about all of the apps I use that required real-time or streaming data, it's eyeball latency. So I think that's a sweet spot for a lot of the data providers, consumers, and platform providers like ourselves in this ecosystem, is to focus on those eyeball latency type of uses and apps. And those really provide a lot of commercial value and I think can really drive adoption.
Can I double down on that? Because I think Anya raises a good point. But it's not just because she's also came from Goldman, but it's in the end of the day, and again, I think speed of light is very, very topical. Is there's no better way to beat the speed of light problem than to not have to move the data at all, right? And if the data is staying in place, right, and then you can just basically say, great, let's blend the data together in human time. Based on a use case and not have to shove it down a pipe and moving from place A to place B to do the analytics. Like if Beacon can just basically point at the live data that ICE has with the live data that they have, of the positions that their customers have together in human time, speed of light actually goes away. So it's again, we all talk about speed of light and cloud. First of all, I think networking is accelerating at a pace where we're in such a gray area. The Iowa Rock, is obviously be able to do this in real time because latency is going down. But at the end of the day, lots of use cases, you don't have to move data at all to get effectively the same real-time application experience that you're trying to get because then data doesn't have to move. So again, really, really topical. And I think, I think this is something that's changing dramatically in how people are perceiving the cloud. We should not shy away from real-time use cases because in the end of the day, it's applications that humans have to see. And in that case, I think the cloud is even better than anywhere else because you can blend data in real time.
Yeah, and to your point, especially in things like analytics pipelines where latency has a different meaning. So not waiting for the data to be published out via an API, for example, can certainly add those benefits. Great. So let me ask a slightly different question on this topic of entitlement control. Until recently, whenever there's a discussion around moving from a deployed on-prem solution to a hosted solution in the cloud, there's generally some concern around permissioning and data leakage and so forth. Now, with these new platforms, whether it's the marketplace or the enabling shared data network, are we addressing those types of entitlement problems ground up in the design, or is it adding another layer of complexity? Anyone can jump in.
I'll jump in. And I mean, if anything, I think we're solving this way better from first principles than we ever were trying to do this on-prem before. And again, I love the Netflix model that we've been kind of tossing around because in the end of the day, and this is where today you can log into Netflix from any device, and it logs in as Matt, right? And regardless of where I'm going to plug into, it's entitling as Matt, but I'm seeing that on my exercise machine, on my iPhone, on my computer, or on my TV. So this access control and personalization that you can get from applications, so that it's me logging in to whatever if I'm logging into Beacon, I should see the data network that I'm allowed to see in Beacon. If I'm logging in through another application, I should see the same data that I'm entitled to that I saw in Beacon, right? So this notion of entitlement control, and it can get really, really granular, because now it's me that I can be acknowledged as Matt working at Snowflake in this role, and that can follow me from wherever I go, because in the end of the day, it's at the data level that you do your entitlements, right? So ICE can say, Matt should see this data, regardless if I'm coming in from Beacon or any other application, or querying the data directly. You entitle data at the data level. Users belong to roles. Roles percolate whether or not they're within their enterprise or whether or not they're accessing the entire data network. They're coming in as the individual. And I think we're in a much better place to do this right than how we've all tried to do this internally within enterprises.
Absolutely. Just to add to that, sorry, I think there's a delay. Just wanted to add to what Matt said from Beacon's perspective. Absolutely agree. And what we also try to do is we think a lot about kind of multi-user group deployments and entitlements within a big enterprise organization. So in addition to what Matt was saying about the granularity that's required to really do it right, we also think a lot about using our platforms, the collaboration tool as well, because some data is, market data, for example, should be shared across an enterprise more freely, and other data that requires more kind of proprietary controls should be much more restricted. So when we think about onboarding hundreds, thousands of developers across an enterprise, we think about that from the ground up as well. And as we get more partnerships with database technologies and data providers, I think having that kind of alignment is really important.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, from your perspective, you're providing real-time streaming data to end users, right? So the real-time entitlement control in real time is a problem domain in itself. How do you rate the readiness of these platforms in terms of entitlement control?
I can only really talk about my own platform with any deep knowledge, but I mean, it's been a perennial challenge for the data owner to ensure that the end data consumer, whether that's an application or an eyeball user, as Anya calls them, it's been a perennial problem, and some of that control has been lost in perhaps the legacy way of doing things. But what we're seeing with data owners, data providers and the exchanges are excellent at this, with controlling who uses their data and gets paid accordingly. So, we're working with data owners that may have historically given away their data to large data vendors, that then the loss of control or transparency as to how their data was being used, and ultimately by that end user, maybe a trader that has a P&L obligation, that is the end person that's paying for that data on which he makes a decision. So, that sort of granularity of information is now available. We can provide a data owner with that transparency as we pass it through our marketplace and deliver it to the end consumer, because we're tracking every point in that process and making sure that if I'm using an Excel spreadsheet, that data element that is going into that spreadsheet, we're aware of that and how it's being used. Equally, if it's on a mobile app or a web page, or equally down an API into a consuming application. So what's crucial in terms of entitlement control, it's clear from data owners who we've onboarded and continue on board, is just give me that transparency and visibility to that data. I do like the Netflix analogy, and we're trying to shift the industry from blockbusters to Netflix as we speak. So that's
nice and very nice.
The challenge. That's the challenge I think we face, because let's not kid ourselves. The industry that we're talking about here, and particularly that industry that consumes real-time data, and it's only a segment of that industry that consumes real-time. is ripe for change and is demanding change because of the technology stacks that are around and available and accessible and cost accessible as well. So yeah, I think entitlement is an absolutely crucial, if not the first item on the agenda when we go to talk to a data owner. How much more can you make from my data for me tends to be the first at the moment. And then how do you control the entitlement to that data? So, yeah.
Right. So sounds like good news overall in terms of implementing granular entitlement control in the core design in a lot of these platforms. So that's promising. I think
I can add a little bit into that. I think you're going to see, from AWS's perspective, we've got 230 security compliance and government services and features. We've got 90 security standards that we covered. 117 of our services can be the data can be encrypted. I think you're going to, the tools for security, the tools for identity and access management, fine-grained access control, logging, reporting, tracking are going to continue to advance and continue to be better and better. And companies like Paul's are really sort of pushing the envelope and getting very, very creative as to how they're going to be able to do this. The cloud does offer an ability to test, experiment, and use existing services to be able to very quickly stand up secure environments. But I think a lot of that creativity will come from the providers like Paul's, who are actually and like Anya's, who are actually going to have to manage that directly.
Can I just throw one more thing in? Just one more thing sure. on this question, because I think it's a great question. And I think what Christian just raised is that, again, the access control is a hard problem, but it gets infinitely easier. I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but when data doesn't have to move, again, because the cloud is all connected, right? If I want to basically lock down my data and I know I can hold on to it, yet still give access, and I can revoke, that changes the game. I mean, in some ways, this problem becomes infinitely easier if I can basically say, like, I'm going to give Anya access to this data, or I'm a provider, I give access to that data, but I don't have to hand over the data. I can remain custody on that data. And now it's just like the internet, right? You're not downloading CNN.com and I got to figure out, do I still have a subscription to that premium content, right? It's out there. And every time I access it, I can check to see if I'm entitled to, right? So I think if you change the whole game, instead of having the data going down pipes, real time or otherwise, the data staying where it needs to be, and then on access time, when I'm trying to use it in an application, at that point, the access control is checked. The problem becomes infinitely easier because now you can actually see when it's being accessed and even track how it's going to be accessed, even for further lineage. But the game changes dramatically in the space that we have, because the cloud is now presents us in one interconnected network.
Mm-hmm. Without having the need to move data. Great. So Correct. Actually, we will need to head to the audience Q&A. There was another question, but I've seen a question coming from the audience which addresses that. So that worked out. First question, I'm interested in hearing about best practices to aggregate data across several providers, especially specialized data, and the management of data quality normalization, and I guess more from the linkage of different data. How is that being done efficiently in these new platforms? Anybody wants to comment on that?
I'll jump in, and then I'm happy to put on. But I think there's two main issues when you think about linkage. One is access, and one is the actual ID space that is involved to link different data sets together. The first one we've talked a lot about, but again, by the fact that you can now have one place that you can go to connect data sets from ICE to S&P to FactSet to alternative data providers, all in one space, where now that all that friction is gone, is the first hurdle that we've talked about, and I think we're on the verge of dramatically changing the space here. That becomes the norm, not the exception. But the second is that now that you have access to data, how do you basically do things like concordance to basically bring these different identities together? So when ICE calls, Tesla, and I'm having an investment in Tesla, and I'm looking at, bonds issued by Tesla, tying all those things together, you can now have a unified space to do this concordance ID matching in a much easier way, because now all the data is being seen in the same common platform. It's a great question. I think this is something that every company has to do on their own mapping solutions. And I think now with this data network that everyone can have access to, you're going to see these data providers or service providers provide these concordant services that really take a load off of everyone in the industry.
Does anyone else want to add to that? No. Okay. Another question is on hosted sandboxes. Sandboxes are often discussed in the same breath as marketplaces or hosted data. Is it mainly a tool that data providers would use to help with data evaluation, or is there a broader application of sandboxes beyond that?
This is Christian. I'll take that one. We're definitely seeing a lot of experimentation in this space where data service providers are looking for models to where they can rent the data to some degree rather than just transfer it over as is typically the model now. So we're seeing a lot of data service providers begin to experiment in creating analytical tools in their own environment, where the customer will come to them, they will access a data source, they will run the numbers, they will run a few analytics tools, and they will subsequently download the results set, rather than downloading all of the data and running it in their own environment. So there's definitely movement in that area. Nothing that I can publicly announce yet, but again, in the sort of agile world of cloud, you're seeing data service providers being able to test out different models and see what works and see what sticks.
Okay.
If I can also jump into this one again, I love this question, and I promise I didn't put this question in there. I wish I had. But I think the idea to treat data like code, and just basically say that, again, if I can tap into this global network and I can basically create my own sandbox view of the world without having to copy this entire data network, but to basically have my own, point in time view of this network that I can not only analyze and evaluate, but then mutate or diddle on top of to say, like, great, I have this entire network. I want to basically look at all this data that I got from ICE and all this reference data I got from S&P against this new ESG data provider. Look at all that data in my own environment, create my own overview on top of this, evaluate without having to copy, by just effectively just layering on different changes on top of one another, and have an infinite number of these environments that anyone can have. And then I can use it in one application, and I can import that kind of sandbox into my Beacon environment and say, great, whatever that sandbox I created here, I want to pull it into my application and see what Beacon can do with that sandbox. Again, without having to copy data, I think is, again, we're seeing a lot of uptake in that use case of these virtual sandboxes instead of actual sandboxes.
Absolutely, and I think there's room for both, right? Where you're going to start to see more data providers that provide apps on their portal and things like that, where you can rent data or you can interact with the data right on the provider side. But as Matt was saying, we think that there's a growing number of clients that want to consume it in their own environment. So when Beacon deploys a Beacon environment, we do so in our client's AWS or Azure, for example, account. So that way, they control the access, and then they are free to take that data, create IP, and do that completely securely without exposing anything that they're doing to Beacon or to the data provider or to anybody else. And that's quite powerful.
Great. I think we have time for just one last question. It just came through. It's an interesting question. How is latency, and I think this is about response latency, how is latency solved for large data sets that are shared across customers? It's very integral to this question of accessing a shared data network, but is there an impact on response latency if different people are trying to access the same data set?
I mean, it's a great question. And, again, speed of light's there, but you got to separate access from the actual, time to movement, right? If I have a petabyte of data, I want to analyze that petabyte of data. I'm typically not having to ship an entire petabyte of data to somewhere into my application, right? I can basically pick and choose the segments I want to look at, and then only have to pay the price of latency for that subset. Typically, you'll have, historical data, right? I'm not going to look at the entire thing. I'm going to look at a segment. So again, I think latency is something that we spend too much time thinking about. On the covers, it's speed of light. And if you think about how much data you need to move and how much, and how quickly that's going to, be, it's independent from the underlying size of the data, particularly if you're not having to move the underlying data to do your analysis. But a great question.
Right. I think we're just over time. Really appreciate everybody's questions, and thank you to our panelists and the audience. Please reach out to us if you have any further feedback or questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.